this video, I'm going to talk about how to use web listeners. The term event refers to the occurrence of something. An event occurs when the state of an object changes. When these exceptions occur, we can conduct certain crucial actions, such as collecting total and current logged in users, establishing database tables, when deploying the project, building database connection objects, and so on. The javax.servlet and javax.servlet.http packages contain numerous event classes and listener interfaces. The primary function of a listener in a GUI application is to concentrate an event from a specific GUI component. Handle is using listener functions and provide the response to the GUI application. The following technique is referred to as event handling or event delegation model in GUI applications. Event categories. Servlet events are divided into two categories, high level and low level. The first one is servlet context level, that means application level. This event concerns resources or states held at the appliance servlet context object's extent. The second one is session level event. It involves resources or states associated with the sequence of requests from a single user session. In other words, it is associated with the HTTP session object. There are two types of events on each of those two levels. The first one is changes in the life cycle and the second one is changes in attributes. For each of the four event categories, we can define one or more event listener classes. Multiply event categories can be monitored by a single listener class. Implementing an interface or interfaces from the javax.servlet package or javax.servlet.http package in a common way to make an occasion class. So here you can see event listener interfaces. Here I have mentioned listener interfaces and a description. You can go through it. So after that, steps of using listeners. If we want to utilize listeners in our web apps, we must follow the steps below. The first step is get the listener class ready. Take one user-defined class, which must be a listener interface implementation class. For instance, consider the public class listener implemented by myListener. The second step is, in the web.xml file, configure the listener class. The following XML tags must be used in the web.xml file to configure the listener class. So after that, except for HTTP session binding listener and HTTP session activation listener, all listeners require the aforementioned listener configuration. So after that, let's talk about methods for event listeners and related classes. Methods for servlet context listeners and the servlet context event class. The following methods are defined by servlet context listener. Here you can see two methods and also you can see the description. So after that, when a web application is deployed on the server, the servlet context event is informed. It includes the technique shown below, which your listener might call servlet context text get servlet context method. This method retrieves the servlet context object that was created or is going to be deleted, from which you may get any information you want. So after that, methods for servlet context attribute listener and the servlet context attribute event class. Servlet context attribute listener specify the following methods. Here you can see three methods I have mentioned in here and you can see the description also. So So after that, the event class servlet context attribute event is used to notify about changes to the attributes for a web application's servlet context. It includes the techniques listed below, which your listener can use. So string get name returns the name of the attribute that was added, deleted, or replaced as a string, and object get value is a method for retrieving the value of an attribute that has been added, deleted, or replaced. This method returns the previous value, not the new value in the event of a replaced attribute. And methods for HTTP session listeners and the HTTP session event class. HTTP session listeners specify the following methods. Here you can see two methods and the description. You can go through it, and after that, when the session object is modified, the HTTP session event is informed. It includes the technique shown below, which your listener might call HTTP session get session method. This function is used to obtain the generated or deleted session object. And after that, methods for HTTP session attribute listener and the HTTP session binding event class. HTTP attribute listener specified the following methods. Here you can see several methods and the description. So you can go through this one also. And when an object implements HTTP session binding listener is bound or freed from a session, HTTP session binding event is delivered to that object or to a HTTP session attribute listener that has been set in the deployment descriptor. When any attribute is bound or unbound or replaced in a session, it includes the techniques listed below when your listener can use. So here I provide you several things, and the first one is string get name returns the name of the attribute that was added, deleted, or replaced as a string, and the second one is object get valued. This is a method for retrieving the value of an attribute that has been added, deleted, or replaced. This method returns the previous value, not the new value in the event of a replaced attribute. The third one is HTTP session get session. This method is used to obtain the session object whose attribute has changed. For example, to demonstrate the servlet listener in action, let's create a basic web application. You can do this using Eclipse IDE or NetBeans IDE. We'll build a dynamic web project called Servlet Listener Example, and the project structure will look like this. Here you can see the project structure, and the context init params and listener settings will be defined in web.xml. The class for database connectivity is database manager. The object will be added to the servlet context as an attribute. I'll deal with the session characteristics and other things in my servlet. We'll use the app context listener to read the servlet context init parameters and use them to create the database manage object, which will then set as an attribute on the servlet context object. Servlet context attribute listener is a simple implementation for logging the event when an attribute in the servlet context is added, removed, or replaced. HTTP session listener is a simple implementation to log the event when the session is created or destroyed. Servlet request listener is to log the servlet request IP address when the request is initialized and destroyed. So here you can see the web.xml. and after that you can see database manager.java. Here you can see it, and after that you can see app context attribute listener.java. So this is it, and after that you can see my servlet request listener.java. You can see it in here, and you can see my session listener.java. After that you can see my servlet.java. So the output is, when we deploy our application and access my servlet, the server log file will include the following logs. You can see the log in here. In the browser we'll see something like this. You can see what we'll see in the browser. So this is our video. Hope you enjoy this video, and thanks for watching.